Hi, thank you for streaming one of our latest messages here at Mountain Lake Church. We hope you enjoyed the message. Please come back again very, very soon. We know that life change stories happen. They happen every day. And at Mountain Lake Church, we want to hear about your life change story. If you'd like to share your story, please visit us at mountainlake.tv and click on the story button. You can also find service locations as well as times. And if you can't come to see us in person, please know that we stream our services every Sunday at 9, 10:30, and noon. We look forward to seeing you this weekend.
Here's a question to consider. The question is this: what happens when there is a gap between what you expect and what you experience? What happens when there is a gap, and for many of us it's a really large gap, between what we expect to happen in our lives and really what we are experiencing in our lives? And I'll give you this illustration. Years ago, Brianna and I used to live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And we lived there, and we lived near this river called the Brazos River. It's fall time, pretty time, and I wanted to go fly in an airplane to go see the leaves change over the Brazos River. And so I have a buddy. Now, when I say I have a buddy, I think every guy in here has buddies like this. And what I mean by that, you want to go to a deer lease, you've got a buddy. Right? You want to go deep sea fishing, I've got a buddy. Or I need somebody to do my taxes, I've got a buddy who will handle it. By a show of hands, how many of you guys in this room, you've got a buddy that will just take care of things? You got those type of, okay. So I had a buddy, and this buddy, he flew stunt planes as a hobby. I tell you, that wasn't his job. And so that was just his hobby, and he flew stunt planes on the weekend. So I called up my buddy. It's like, hey, I want to go fly the Brazos River. I want to see the leaves change. He goes, yeah, come on out. And so I went out there, and my buddy, the airplane that he owned was a Czechoslovakian stunt plane. And I had no clue they made those. I didn't either, and so it could have been a made-up airplane. But anyway, so I went there. It's an inline airplane, pilot, and there's a prop plane. And so we're walking. He's like, yeah, come on out. And so we're walking the airplane. He goes, oh, hey, by the way, you might need this. And he throws me a parachute. And I catch it, and I'm like, what is this? He's like, well, if we crash, you're going to want to use that. I'm like, oh, are you going to go over the instructions? Or how does, he's like, no, I just put it on. I'm like, I don't wear these on a daily basis. And he's like, oh, you'll figure it out. And so I strap it on, the best way I think I know how. And so I'm there. And so we're up there flying the Brazos, beautiful, and seeing the leaves change and everything. And then he pauses. He's like, hey, do you want to do some stunts? I was like, yeah, just don't tell Brianna. And he goes, okay, hang on. And so we started doing barrel rolls and flips and all that kind of stuff, and it was great. And we were about to land. He goes, hey, I want to do one more stunt. I was like, okay, what do you want to do? He said, I want to do a hammerhead. Yeah, like one person knows what a hammerhead is. And so if you're a pilot, you know what it is. I didn't know what it is. So what happens, here's a hammerhead. It's where the airplane goes straight up and then somersaults over in midair and comes down. And that's a hammerhead. And so he goes, all right, here we go. And so we're going straight up, and he kicks it over to the left, and the plane stalls. Engine just cuts, and all of a sudden, the airplane starts falling. Now, if you've ever been in an airplane that stalled, and you're not the pilot, there's a lot of things running through your mind at that time. A lot of things, like, this is how it's all going to go. Do I jump out now? Does this parachute really work? All sorts of things. And I can just tell you, you can be the biggest atheist in the world. You stall in an airplane, you're finding Jesus, okay? That's anyway, so we're stalling, I'm going, oh my God, it's happening super fast and everything. And then he's like, I got it. I'm like, well, I don't, okay. And so he gets it, and the engine fires back up, and we pull around, and there he's like, you okay? And I'm like, you didn't hear anything I said, did you? And so this was before I was a preacher. So anyway, he's like, oh, and he goes, I forgot. Now, you don't want to have your pilot say, I forgot. You don't want to have your doctor say, I forgot. You don't want to have your CPA. Anybody important in your life, the word I forgot in their craft or trade, it's just not something you want to hear. He goes, oh, I forgot. I'm like, well, you probably shouldn't forget. And he's like, yeah. This airplane, it has more power to the right than it does the left. I'm going, you forget. It's like 50-50, and then like pilot 101. Don't you know this? He's like, no. Let's do it again. And so we go all the way up, and he kicks it over to the right, and the engine stays on, and we do the hammerhead, and we land, and I change my pants, and we go home. I expected a leisurely flight down the Brazos River, look at the beautiful leaves change. What I experienced was very, very different. And I tell you that tongue-in-cheek, but we're in the middle of this series called More Life Change. And so what happens when you expect your life to change and what you experience is very, very different? There's a gigantic gap. And what happens when that gap from what you expect to happen and what you experience is filled with more difficulty, filled with more pain, and takes longer than you would ever imagine? If you were here last week, we saw Carrie's story on video. If you didn't see it, you need to go to our Facebook page and see it. And it's an incredible story of life change. But with the magic of video editing, we condensed 3 years of her life into 3 minutes. And you sit here and go, oh man, that's fantastic. It can happen to Carrie, it can happen to me. Absolutely it can. But you need to understand that 3 years is condensed into 3 minutes. And so what happens when you go, I want Jesus to change my life, or Jesus to change my marriage, or Jesus to change my business, and what you expect to happen and what you experience is very different. And in that gap is hardship, difficulty, pain, and a whole lot of time. Like what happens when your life change is not going well? You expect your marriage to go, well, we were in the divorce attorney's office and I wanted us to be, this perfect couple a week later. Well, what happens when it takes a lot longer and there's a lot more pain? What happens when you accept Jesus as your Lord and as your Savior and you go, I'm a Christ follower, your family is not, and all of a sudden they reject you. All of a sudden, there's this weird tension at Christmas and at Thanksgiving. They don't talk to you because they're not Jesus followers, and now you are, and it's weird and it's strange. What happens then? Or what happens when you're a business owner and you make a decision that's different than the way you used to because now Jesus is at the center of your business and it costs you a whole lot of money? Or maybe even worse, you're an employee. And instead of going along with this gray area that your boss asked you to, you stand on what you believe God has called you when your morals and values, and all of a sudden you lose your job. What happens then? What happens when your life change story is not going well? And we're going to wrestle through that today, and there are a few things that we need to realize, cognitively speaking, in our mind, what it means to walk through a life change story. And then there are some things that we need to actually put into practice in our lives. And I'm going to lay this out there before you to just kind of to clear my conscience so everybody knows this, all right? What we're about to discuss today, it is way easier to stand here and preach it, way easier to sit there and listen to it than it is for any of us to walk out those doors and live it. I'm just going to throw that out there. What we're talking about, you're going to nod and go, oh yeah, that was good. I get that. I'm preaching. I'm going, oh yeah, this is great. But when we walk out the doors, we walk into difficulty, hardship, pain, a whole lot of time. It's way easier to preach it, way easier to listen to it than it is to live it out. But I think if you can recognize a few of these things and put these things into practice, you will experience greater hope than you have ever experienced before in your life. And so that moment when you're on this side of the life change story and this gap is filled with difficulty or pain or a whole lot of time, you will find incredible hope if you will just realize a few things and put a few things into practice. So with all that in mind, if you've got a Bible, I need you to grab it. If not, it'll be up on the screen. Go to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. And if you're thumbing, start from the right, you'll get there a lot quicker. Hebrews chapter 11. And while you're turning there, let me just give you a quick context of Hebrews. We don't know who the writer is, but the writer is writing in a time where Christians are under extreme persecution. And he's just reminding them that Jesus is better than anything else. And in Hebrews chapter 11, if you've grown up in church, then you'll know Hebrews chapter 11 is referenced oftentimes as the hall of faith, the hall of faith. And it's just great stories of men and women, Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and Jacob and Moses and all these men and women of faith, that things happened. They had faith in God and God delivered. But there's a part in this chapter that you and I are going to see where the writer does an about face when he's talking about some other groups of people, but all still had faith. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 11. Let's just start in verse 1 where he defines what faith is. Here's faith. Faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about the things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in the days of old earned a good reputation. So he's talking about faith. He's going, faith is simply this. It gives us assurance about the things we cannot see, the things that we hope for. So we're on this side. We hope our lives change. We hope our marriage changes. We hope our family gets better. We hope our business is better. And faith is what gets you through that moment. And it's that thing that we hope for will actually happen. That's the definition of faith. And then the writer goes through a whole bunch of stories of Abraham and Isaac and Noah and Sarah and Moses and all these great men and women of faith. And then in verse 32, he begins to wrap up this thought. Look at verse 32. He says, how much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Japheth, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle, put whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from death. Hooray and amen. Like we read that and we go, yes, I like that. I like to win. I want to overcome things. I want things to go great. I like reading about those men and women of faith. That's why in Sunday school they put them on the flannel boards and going, yes, these are the men and women that had faith and God delivered and God answered and God rescued. And then in the next part of verse 35, the writer completely changes. Look at the second part of verse 35. He says, but, and here's where he changes gears. But others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prisons. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. If you're here, you go, whoa, Chris, can we just stop before verse 35? Like, let's just go back. Let's talk about Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and Moses. Those are great. God delivered, God answered, God rescued. But some were sawn in half. Some were jeered at. Some, their backs were cut open with whips. Look what happens as he finishes it up. Verse 39. Verse 39 starts out with all these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them had received all that God had promised, for God had something better in mind for us so that they would not reach perfection without us. All of these men and women earned a good reputation because of their faith. The heroes of the faith, Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and Moses, and those that are anonymous. And it's interesting that there's these two groups of polarizing outcomes. There's this one group, the names that we all know, the names that we've all studied, going, yes, they have faith. And then there's this group of anonymous people, men and women that we don't know by name, but their outcomes, their life was not going well. But what the writer says is all of them, both the heroes of the faith and those that we don't know their names, all of them had a good reputation because of their faith. And here's what I want you to grasp and what I want you to recognize first and foremost is that sometimes life change stories come with scars. Sometimes life change stories come with scars. They hurt, they're difficult, they're painful, and there's a scar left. It's an emotional scar, it's a relational scar, it's a financial scar, it's a physical scar, it's a mental scar. It's something that you've gone through, but if you think about a scar, it really represents two things. It represents hurt and healing. Hurt and healing. Something happened, there was some pain, there was some hurt, but then there was some healing, but a scar was left. So the first thing you must realize and understand, if your life change story is not going well, like if what you expected to happen and what you're experiencing, if there is some pain and difficulty in a long period of time, you need to understand that sometimes a life change story comes with a scar. But a scar has a story to tell. It tells a story of both hurt and healing. Well, that's the first thing you need to recognize, you need to know and understand. The second thing you need to understand is this, is that you are not alone in your suffering. You are not alone in your suffering. There are generations of men and women that have come before you, before me, that have suffered and have suffered well. And chapter 11 is a whole list of both heroes and those that are anonymous, and they all had faith. And so you are not alone in your suffering, in your pain, in your difficulty, and wondering, is this going to take forever? But what Satan would love to do is to let you think that you're on your own. You go, man, this marriage is taking a whole lot longer to repair than I ever thought it would. And Satan would love to say, and you're all alone. Well, this family that was fractured, we're trying to put back together, these things, it's difficulty. And Satan would love to say, and you're all alone. Well, the relational pain of my family, because now I'm a Christian and nobody is, and that's kind of awkward and difficult, he'd love to say, and you're all alone. But the truth of the matter is you're not. You're not alone in your suffering. And sometimes life change stories come with scars. But let me tell you this. When you have a scar, you've been hurt, it's been difficult, but it's healed over. What a scar gives you, it gives you the authority to speak from empathy rather than sympathy. Let me say that again. A scar gives you the authority to speak from empathy rather than sympathy. Sympathy says, man, I feel for you. Gosh, I really hope things get better. Empathy goes, I've been where you're at. I know the pain, and I know the hurt, and I know how long it takes, and I've got the scars to prove it. But I can tell you, as much as it hurts, there's great healing through it. And scars give you the authority to say, I speak from empathy and I know what you're going through. How do you know? I've got the scar to prove it. I've got the emotional scar, the mental scar, I've got the financial scar, the family scar to prove it. And so sometimes life change stories, they come with unbelievable amount of pain and difficulty and hurt and scars, but scars give you the authority to speak from empathy. You've all been through things in your life. Financial issues, sicknesses, family issues. Brianna and I have as well. And I've shared this before, but one of the things we went through early on is our son David, our second born, who's now 6 going on 7. When he was 3 months old, he had major skull surgery, craniosynostosis, and his head was fused, and they had to take out a major part of his skull. And for a year, he wore this little helmet right there. And you look at that and you go, that's cute and that's sweet. And look at that, he's got a football and helmet. Brianna and I look at that picture and we look at one of the longest year and a half of our life. Now, walking through that as parents, and you look at it and go, oh, that's sweet. We look at it and go, we were freaked out that something would hit his head if the helmet was off. We didn't know, and people would look at it and didn't know what to say. We understand that awkwardness of it. We understand what it's like taking him to the doctor, and he had to wear 4 of those over the course of the year. We understand that and what that looks like, and it took us a year and a half to go through that process. And through that process, we had so many people come up and go, we're praying for you and we feel for you, and that meant a lot to Brianna and I. But what meant the most, when other parents came up and go, we've been through what you're going through. Our kid wore the helmet. We understand the difficulty. We understand the pain. We understand the questions as parents. And here's how you get through it. Sympathy was great, but empathy is going, I've got the scar to show that we've been through what you've been through. And after going through that, I can tell you that Brianna and I, we can spot a kid with a helmet a mile away. And we love going up to the parents and asking about it because the usual parent will go, well, yeah, and we go, no. We understand. Well, what do you mean? When we begin to share our story, we've got the scar to prove it. We've got the experience to prove it. And so, yes, sometimes life-change stories come with scars, but scars give you the authority to speak from empathy. And if you're walking through something, you need to know that you are not alone. There's men and women that have come before you. There's men and women here in this room that are suffering, and they're suffering well, and you hang in there and you do not give up. And then the writer changes and gives us a couple of things to do after this realization. Look at chapter 12, verse 1. After he finishes up talking about these men and women, some are heroes, some are anonymous, chapter 12, he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, and that's all the ones referenced back in chapter 11, those that we know by name and those that we don't, but all of them. He says, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. Let us throw off the weight. Let us get rid of the weight in our life, and especially the weight of sin. He goes, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and now he's seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. What he's writing to this group of men and women here in this first century that are going through difficulties, and he reminds them that they're not alone. He reminds them that there's difficulties in the life of faith. And so when we understand that when our life change story, what we're expecting, what we experience is very, very different. We understand that we're not alone. We understand that sometimes these stories come with scars. He goes, in light of all of that, he goes, you release the weights that you're carrying. He goes, and you run the race with endurance. And then he says, you relentlessly pursue Jesus. You release the weights, you run the race, and he goes, and you relentlessly pursue Jesus. And so let's talk about those ideas for a minute. When he talks about releasing the weights, he says it's those things in your life that you're carrying, and especially the sin that so easily entangles you. There's two types. There's sin and there's stuff. Stuff is not necessarily a sin, but it's the thing that's slowing you down. It's friendships that you know you probably shouldn't have. It's hobbies that are taking time away from working on your family or your marriage. It's just stuff that you have in your life that's carrying you down. And then there's sin. It's that thing in your life that honestly only you and God know, but it's that thing that you're carrying around that you haven't confessed and repented of. And the race in and of itself, the race of life, is difficult enough on its own. Why in the world would you continue to carry the weights to make it more painful, more difficult? Let me illustrate it this way. Now, let me illustrate it this way. So some of you, you're running the race of life like this, and you're going, you've got the sin, you've got the stuff, and you're walking around, and you're going, man, life is just difficult and painful. What I'm experiencing is very different than what I was expecting, and you've got sin, you've got stuff. Now, I'm not going to lie. I'm doing my very best not to shake and breathe heavy holding these in front of all of you. I'm trying to make you think that, but these are 45-pound weights that I borrowed from a buddy of mine, a buddy who has kettlebell weights. Yeah. I tell you, I got a buddy for everything. Anyway, so I can tell you it is very, very difficult to stand up here and try to preach and concentrate. The reason why is I'm really concentrating on not looking like an idiot in front of all of you and dropping these on my toe. I'm holding this. It's very, very difficult. And some of you, you've got this sin. You've got stuff. You've got those relationships or those friendships or those things in your life that, gosh, they're from your past, but you just don't want to let it go. Some of you got something in you. It's pride, it's ego, it's jealousy, it's that secret addiction that nobody knows about. And you're trying to walk through life and it's just so difficult. And many of you today need to release the weights. You need to get rid of the stuff that so easily entangles you in the sin that trips you up and run the race that's difficult enough as is. Why make it more difficult by picking up the weights and trying to run with them? How much longer will you continue to carry the stuff and the sin that weighs you down? And what if today you begin to release the weights and say, you know what? No longer do I allow this to distract me. No longer do I have this. And Jesus, I'm confessing this sin in my life and I'm going to repent from it. And today I begin to release the weights. And then he says, run the race with endurance. And I think it's interesting that the writer doesn't say, run the race with a smile on your face. When you release the weights and skip through the race. He doesn't say skip, he doesn't say hop, he doesn't say jump, he says run with endurance. In other words, the race is difficult, the race is painful, the race is long, it's gonna take endurance and patience. He says, but you run the race and you don't give up. And you don't quit, and you don't go, well, I've given it one last effort and I'm done. He's going, you stay faithful. And as followers of Jesus, we have the greatest and highest model in Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. He didn't give up, he didn't give in, he endured the cross because of the joy on the other side waiting for him. And as followers of Jesus, he goes, you release the weights, the sin, the stuff, and he goes, and you run the race. And yes, it's difficult, yes, it's painful, and yes, it's probably gonna take longer than you ever expected, but you hang in there and you do not give up. You run the race with endurance. He says, and you keep your eyes on Jesus, or you relentlessly pursue Jesus. Because what you need to understand is that Jesus is the hope beyond the pain. As painful as the race may be, Jesus is the hope on the other side of the pain. He goes, and you keep your eyes on Jesus and you don't get distracted by shiny objects or by the stuff or by the sin or by anything else. He goes, you pursue Jesus relentlessly. You keep your eyes on him. You run the race, and yes, it's painful, and yes, it's difficult, but you say, Jesus, I'm looking at you because you're the hope on the other side of the pain, and you're the hope on the other side of the race, on the other side of the finish line. And so, Jesus, I'm keeping my eyes on you, and I'm placing my hope in you and you alone. I'm sure all of you have watched at least some of the Olympics over the past couple of weeks. You know, we've been watching, and I love watching the track and field and swimming and everything. And if you think about it, there's these men and women that for the last 4 years have given up extra hours of sleep. They've worked out hours and hours a day. They've sacrificed not eating pizza at 10 o'clock at night. I mean, they've made some incredible sacrifices for the past 4 years. And it's all for one thing, and it's to pursue the gold medal. And I think it's funny that for 4 years they train, they work, they diet, they don't do this, they don't do that. And then for 2 weeks, you and I sit there and watch them, and we sit there on the couch eating like potato chips and popcorn going, man, they should have run faster. I can't believe she fell off the balance beam. I mean, it's 4 inches wide. I mean, how difficult is it, right? You do it, you go, man, if he had just like run a little faster, he would have won gold, but no, he got silver, and we're just sitting there eating it. Why can't they swim? I mean, how difficult is it to swim? And so we sit there. But for 4 years, they pursue it, and they train, and they diet, and they exercise for the gold. That's it. That's what they're going for. And what he's saying is when you run the race, because you strip off the stuff and the sin that so easily entangles you, and you run with endurance, and goes, the goal, the prize is Jesus Christ, who's seated at the right hand of the Father. And so you keep your eyes on him and say, Jesus is difficult, and Jesus is painful, and yes, I'm gonna have to make some sacrifices, and people are gonna look, and people are gonna judge, and people are gonna say all sorts of things, but Jesus, you're the one I'm relentlessly pursuing. Jesus is the hope beyond the pain. In other words, I'm going to say it this way: you can keep your eyes on the perfecter of your faith and not the pain of your race. The perfecter of your faith, Jesus, who's perfecting and grooming you and leading you toward him. Not the pain of your race, the difficulty, the frustration, the time. He goes, you keep your eyes on Jesus. You don't get sidetracked to the left or to the right. You relentlessly pursue Jesus. And for those of you that your expectations and your experience, there's a gigantic gap there in your life change. And it is filled with more difficulties, hardships, painful moments, and more time than you could ever imagine. I just want you to realize that you're not alone, and that sometimes these life change stories, they just come with scars, but scars give you the authority to speak from empathy. And when you can realize that, then you begin to self-evaluate and saying, Lord, what is the stuff and the sin that I'm still grabbing onto? And today, Jesus, I let it go. And Jesus, I begin to run this race with endurance and with faithfulness. And Jesus, I'm going to keep my eyes on you all the way until I cross that finish line of heaven. I'll finish with this, and it's a quote that I read, and it's written, the quote was by one of my favorite commentary writers. His name is Warren Wiersbe, and he writes incredible commentaries who I study every week. And I just love this quote that he says about faith. He says, our faith is not really tested until God asks us to bear what seems unbearable, do what seems unreasonable, and expect what seems impossible. Our faith is not really tested until God asks us to bear what seems unbearable, do what seems unreasonable, and expect what seems impossible. But that's when your faith is stretched and is tested and is grown, when what you expect to happen and what you're actually experiencing, and there's some difficulties and pains in there. Well, God, are you really asking me to begin to walk through this pain to restore this relationship? Yes. Well, God, are you really asking me to have these difficult conversations for as long as it takes to restore this marriage? Yes. Well, God, are you really asking me to say no to these financial opportunities in order to build this business on godly morals and principles and values? Yes. Well, God, that's difficult. Yep. It's painful. That's taken a long time, Lord. I know. But you stay faithful. Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Well, Lord, that's going to hurt. I'm going to get the scar. Yeah, you are. But that scar is going to be able to tell a story of both hurt and healing. You release the weights and you run that race faithfully. And he says, and you relentlessly pursue Jesus. Let me pray for us. With every head bowed and every eye closed, as a pastor, I am unfortunately all too aware and familiar of this gigantic need in people's life of realizing that what they expect to happen and what they're actually experiencing, they don't always add up. And there's questions and confusions and sometimes cynicism in all of it. So, Father God, I'm asking that you would remind every individual in this room and those watching the live stream, God, that you are the only hope beyond the pain. There's nothing else. And that they are not alone in the race that they're running through and the pain that they're feeling, but God, that you would restore unto them the joy of their salvation. Again, with every head bowed and every eye closed, I don't know what your story of faith is, but I know many of you come in here lost, confused, and what we're expecting, what you're experiencing is very different. You're just kind of running around aimlessly in circles, and I'm here to tell you that the only thing that will provide you a true hope and a true peace in your life and in your search is a relationship with Jesus. It's the only thing. If you've never trusted in Jesus, never received that hope and that peace, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that today, right now. The Bible says all who call upon the Lord will be saved. If you've never done that, I'm going to give you an opportunity right now. I'm going to lead you in a very simple prayer. Nothing super spiritual about this prayer. It's just a confession of your heart, just a way for me to lead you through that. If you're ready to trust in Jesus and receive hope that you've never received before, just simply say something like this. Just say, Lord Jesus, I know I'm a sinner. Without you, I cannot get into heaven. Just come into my heart and be Lord of my life from this day forward. Thank you for my salvation. And Jesus, I pray for everybody here in this room that's hurting, that's struggling, that's walking through it. And Lord, my prayer that you speak into the depths of their hearts right now, through the pain and through the tears and through the fear and through the heartache, that their only hope can be found in you. We love you, Jesus, and ask all these things in your name.